get?
I got on my computer 5:29, but the clock is 5:30 with a light reflection. Good evening. Welcome to the Charter Township of Van Buren Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, July 27th, 2022. And call the meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Here.
Here.
Medina Atchison is excused. Callie Barr is excused. Sherry Budd.
Here.
Brian Kelly.
Here. We have an agenda that's before us this evening. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
I make a motion, we approve the agenda as presented.
Support.
Motion by Commissioner Budd, support by Commissioner Cullen. Any comments or discussion regarding the agenda this evening?
Through the chair.
Yes, Director Power.
I do have a couple of comments on the agenda for tonight. The agenda has some significant items that we should be all set to address, but I do have a request that we withdraw consideration of new business item number 3, the requested landscaping modification for 10010 Belleville Road. There's some additional information that staff is gathering on that request. And I will leave the rest of the agenda to the discretion of the Planning Commission. I say that because item number 5 under new business is ready to act on, but if for some reason there's a time constraint or we're running out of time tonight, there's no reason that we have to get that done tonight. There's nobody waiting for us to address that one. So just more of a editorial comment on item 5, but I would request that item 3 is removed.
Okay, thank you so much, Director Power. Commissioner Budd, would you like to?
Yeah, I make a motion that we amend the motion to withdraw new business items number 3 and number 5 from the agenda that was presented.
I'll maintain support.
Discussion?
I was going to ask discussion as well. Yes, Commissioner Jar.
If we have time to address item 5 this evening, I think we ought to. This is the item that was dropped from the previous meeting.
Right.
I think the intent that Director Power was making was that if we ran late, that it could wait, but maybe we shouldn't drop it immediately, but wait and see.
Okay, I change my motion again.
I still support.
All right, so we got a motion with a couple amendments from Commissioner Budd, support by Commissioner Cullen. All in favor to support the amended agenda, say aye.
Aye.
And the agenda as modified is approved. We have a request to approve the minutes from the regular meeting of July 13th, 2022.
Move to approve the meeting minutes.
Support.
I have a motion by Commissioner Jar, support by Commissioner Cullen. Do we have any comments or discussion regarding the presented minutes? Seems we have none. All in favor of approving the minutes for the meeting of July 13th, 2022, say aye.
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 Opposed? And the meeting minutes are approved. Our first item up on the agenda tonight is a public hearing, item number 1 for Sumter Road Corridor Plan. It's an item that we have been working on for quite some time, and can I have a motion to approve the public hearing?
I move to open the public hearing for item number 1.
Support.
Got a motion to approve the public hearing by Commissioner Jar, support by Commissioner Budd. Any comments or discussion regarding the item? All in favor of opening the public hearing, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the public hearing is open. Director Power, I believe you may have a presentation for us.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to say at this point that I will present some additional slides during the discussion and possible recommendation and a little bit further into the agenda, but I would like to speak on what this public hearing is for, and it relates to the second public hearing tonight, which is for a related project, but this is the actually second public hearing formally for the Sumter Road Corridor Plan. There was one held on May 25th, and we had addressed a new letter to our neighboring communities to inform them of the date of this hearing, which is a little bit different than the first one. The first hearing was a little bit more of a just a general hearing for the people who are interested in this project, but this one is following the requirements of the state law to inform our neighboring cities and townships and service providers that we are considering adopting this plan. So it's another chance for anybody who has comments from those communities or anybody else from Van Buren Township to speak out about the plan. And this is, again, the kind of overarching plan that sets the tone for future land use in the next up to 20 years along Sumter Road in Van Buren Township. A related public hearing, which is the second item on the agenda, is for the specific zoning regulations that are meant to help to implement that plan. So item number 1, we're talking about receiving any further comments on the plan document that's been out in circulation for a while. And then item number 2 would be any comments on the specific zoning ordinance language. And then in new business, once we've heard those comments, we'll go into some more of the details of what's been changed, and then any other detailed questions you have.
Thank you so much, Director Power. Do we have anybody from the audience this evening that would like to speak on this agenda item? No? Director Power, do we have anybody joining us by Zoom this evening that may have anything additional for this agenda item?
No, we do not.
All right, thank you so much, Director Power. As we have no comment on this agenda item, I'd request a motion to close the public hearing.
I move to close the public hearing for item number 1.
Support.
A motion to close the public hearing by Commissioner Jar and support by Commissioner Cullen. Any comments or discussion regarding the motion? Seeing as we have none, all in favor to close the public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
And we have closed the public hearing for item number 1 on the agenda this evening. Brings us to item number 2, our second public hearing for this evening regarding the Sumter Road Corridor Zoning Ordinance Text Amendments.
I would make a motion that we open the public hearing for the Sumter Road Corridor Zoning Ordinance Text Amendment.
Support.
We got a motion to open the public hearing by Commissioner Budd, support by Commissioner Jar. Do we have any comments or discussion regarding the motion? So we have none. All in favor of opening the public hearing on item number 2 regarding the text amendments, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And we are open for our public hearing on item number 2. Director Power?
Thank you. So again, this is a request for any comments on the specific zoning language in the Sumter Road corridor related zoning ordinance text amendments. And this is required by state law before the Planning Commission considers adopting any amendments to the zoning ordinance. There's a required public hearing. We have had multiple work sessions on these topics throughout the course of this year. On the heels of a certain level of development of the plan, we reached a point where we said, okay, now it's time to get into the zoning plan and the specific recommendations for things like setbacks, visual aids to help to identify different building types, identifying specific uses that are allowed in the Sumter Road Mixed Use District. So the Planning Commission, and to some extent the Sumter Road Master Plan Subcommittee, got into the details of what those things are. And once we reached a point where we had a full set of draft amendments, we published a notice in the Belleville Area Independent that identified that there are changes to Article 2, Section 2.102 of the zoning ordinance, which is definitions and specific terms. Article 3, which is zoning districts and permitted uses, including our permitted uses by district table, which is Section 3.104. The footnotes to that table, which is Section 3.105. The Belleville Road Mixed Use District, because we were distinguishing that mixed use district from the Sumter Road one, which is Section 3.119. And Section 3.121, the Sumter Road Mixed Use District. And then looking at those changes, we also identified Article 4, Section 4.102, the Schedule of Regulations. And we created Article 6, Chapter 4, which is a supplemental zoning district standard set for the Sumter Road Overlay District. So these ordinance amendments, again, we'll go into detail in the discussion, but these, again, are the implementation tools for the vision that we saw in the Sumter Road corridor plan. So anybody who has any specific comments about those kinds of things like setbacks and building types and uses and the things that grew out of that discussion, along with the landscape and architectural guidelines for development along Sumter Road that are in the overlay district, feel free to speak out on those. They've been on the website for a while, and here's an opportunity to talk about them more in depth at the public hearing.
Thank you so much, Director Power. Brings us up to public comment regarding this item. Is there anybody here this evening that would like to speak regarding agenda item number 1, the zoning ordinance text amendments? All right, Director Power, do we have anybody happen to have logged in or speaking on Zoom this evening, or joining us by Zoom this evening?
Nope, there's nobody.
All right, as we have no public comment on Zoom or live, I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Through the chair, make a motion to close the public hearing.
Support.
I have a motion to close the public hearing by Commissioner Budd, support by Commissioner Cullen. Any comments or discussion regarding this agenda item? Seeing as none, all in favor to close the public hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? And the public hearing is closed. We're on to item number 1 under new business, the Sumter Road Corridor Plan adoption. First item up is presentation by, I believe, you, Director Power, is that correct?
Yes, and excellent timing. Planning consultant, Adam Cook, who really was the driving engine behind the writing of the document and helped to steer us through this process. So Adam is here to help speak to the plan, and I know we've talked about it in many public meetings here. We want to go over some of the kind of go back to the basics of what is contained in this plan, and I'll present some slides on the plan, and then I'll try to stop so that we can have discussion about the plan, and then we'll go into the zoning ordinance recommendations. And the item on the agenda tonight is written as adoption, and what happens at this point is the Planning Commission can consider recommending to the Board of Trustees the adoption of this plan. They can recommend with minor revisions, which staff can change prior to the board considering it, or the Planning Commission can look at it and request some additional feedback and additional edits if they desire. But if the inclination is to recommend the either approval or conditional approval with some revisions made, there's a resolution in your packet that speaks to that recommendation that you can make to our Board of Trustees at their first opportunity, which will probably not be until maybe late August or September at this point. So we have a little bit of time. But again, excuse the wall of text here, but just to recap the components of this plan, this is a plan that speaks to the future land use, mobility guidelines in terms of the future road network and things related to roads and pedestrian movement, and goals and objectives for the future of Sumter Road insofar as it's a roadway in Van Buren Township from the border of Sumter Township up to the city of Belleville. And the plan contains components that are required under state law, PA 33 of 2008, the Michigan Planning Enabling Act. There are, broadly speaking, an inventory of conditions and features. Comments were received over the life of the plan writing, and there was a well-attended outdoor workshop at the fire station last summer, about a year ago. I think it was a year ago tomorrow. And so these are all things that are required under the state law. There's also specific recommendations for future land use that are required. And in this case, we developed recommendations for a Sumter Road mixed-use district for this area that's more specific than the previous mixed-use district that was identified in the plan, and some changes to the other future land use in the area, as well as recommended design guidelines for rural residential development patterns along Sumter Road. Through the zoning plan that was developed as part of this master plan, sub-area plan update, there were specific guidelines recommended to develop a Sumter Road mixed-use zoning district and a Sumter Road overlay district. And this is a really important piece of state law that every master plan is bound to a zoning plan, which makes sure that the plan isn't just a static document that sits on a shelf. It tells you, here's when you're making future zoning decisions, how they need to line up with the recommendations in the plan. So the zoning plan was a big part of that to show, here's what the Sumter Road Mixed Use Future Land Use District actually means. We're going to write specific zoning language that links to what's required in that area. Just looking at the components of this plan, you can see there's a lot that was put into it in terms of the chapters, because there are many layers to it. When you get into recommendations for mixed use, you're talking about very specific forms in different areas. So there were a lot of different components to the future land use. But just to recap the overall structure of the plan, we introduced this section of the township. Adam had done a really in-depth review of the corridor through the years and the history of development along the corridor, as well as the existing fabric of the land uses on the corridor today. We, of course, talked about the public engagement we've done. And then we get into the corridor tomorrow, the vision statement, and the future land use plan, which is where we started to organize our thoughts around the future land use ideas that came out of the public input we received. We looked at identifying specific building types and lot types, which again goes back to this idea of a regulating plan and specific building types that apply in specific areas. And then within that, we identified 4 distinct lot types in the district: the deep frontage lot, shallow frontage lot, rear lots, which sit behind the ones that front on Sumter Road on the west side of the road, and then anchor lots, which I did not include in this list, but they are in the plan, which are those lots at the main corners of Bemis and of Hull Road. We talked about those mobility recommendations for future road network, as well as how to have strategic design for the existing road network. And then, of course, the zoning plan that I just spoke about. And then the implementation of this plan really relies on adhering to the zoning ordinance where the zoning ordinance already applies in terms of the areas we've already assigned as single-family residential or rural residential. Those are areas that link in our zoning plan directly to single-family residential R1C zoning district and the ag zoning district. But then the other recommendation of the zoning plan was to look at the development of those mixed use, the mixed use Sumter Road zoning district and the Sumter Road overlay district. So that was the outcome of the plan, and how it will get implemented over the years is people, as they make development decisions and rezoning decisions, they will rezone to the new mixed use districts that were identified. For a kind of visual aid, I'll see if this actually works, and it might not. So I might just get out of there. But we do have an interactive map if there's any other desire to pan around the coverage area of this plan and look at the future land use in more detail, which we've done before. But the full plan was provided in the packet for tonight. I encourage you to flip through it and speak on any continued recommendations for it so that Adam and I can know how to proceed from here. I don't know if Adam, if you have anything else you want to say about the plan to date?
You're doing a great job.
All right.
Through the chair, Director Power,
Yes.
in the existing situation we have right now, the pink areas that are on the thing that I see is a local commercial district. What is the zonings on those?
Those are primarily C zoning, although the parcel that is southwest of the corner of Hull and Sumter, right at that corner on the southwest face of it, is actually zone C1, where the gas station is. And then the parcels immediately at Bemis and Sumter Road, I believe, are also C1. I'll check that live in the meeting, but I think those are also C1. But everything else that's designated as light pink links to the C local commercial zoning district.
What control do we have over that as far as there's the mixed use district will actually give us more control over what type of businesses go into those areas than what the general C is?
That's right. If you look in the recommendations of the Sumter Road Overlay District, similar to what we do with the Belleville Road Overlay District, there's an area north of Hull Road where we identify that only the uses that are in the Sumter Road mixed-use district can be able to develop there. Now, continuing existing businesses that are there can continue, but to bring in new development in that area would have to be consistent with the uses in the Sumter Road mixed-use district.
What about rehabbing of the buildings that are there? Are they going to have to fall under the new requirements that are, in other words, like the cork and bottle that's sitting there across, if that is bought and redone, will they have to follow the mixed use, or would they still be grandfathered in under the local C?
That is a very good question, and because it's a difficult question because you have to establish the complete vacancy of the building, and it has been effectively vacant. But we would have to look at if it's been fully abandoned, and then if so, then we would have to make a decision that yes, they would be obligated to redevelop in consistency with what the overlay district requires, which is to be compliant with at least the uses in the mixed use district.
Okay, thank you.
Director Power, this nice little map that's in our agenda, do you have a way to bring that up on the
Yeah,
screen?
let me try again. I was having
I'm not
trouble setting it.
necessarily saying that the really big overlay, but you have this one that's on the agenda that you added that's got the side-by-side to
Yes.
show what the existing and the proposed.
Oh, I see yeah, in the agenda, I know what you mean.
Yep.
And that's, yes, I can definitely show that.
It might
That's
help it
probably a
in-
good visual aid to, let me try to see if our internet is cooperating, and I should be able to pull that up.
I just like the way you can kind of contrast the two of them of where it's, what it is and where it's going.
Yeah, in fact, let me see if I can do something here, because I think I could just pull it up on our screen overhead. Maybe. Okay, that's closer. It's a quirk that I haven't figured out, the upside down view, but let's try to get that focused. And it might need to be zoomed out a little. Let's see. It's a little better. Okay. So you can see here, yeah, and this is what really the future land use changes come down to is, and the color's a little bit off on this screen, but you see from top to bottom, north to south, in the previous plan, there was an area identified as mixed use, but in that plan, which was the south side plan from 2006, and in the 2020 Van Buren Township Master Plan, there's language that identifies that we don't clarify what mixed use means or what it should look like, and we need to develop that further. So that's what we've done here. But additionally, we've done that, but we've also recognized that the commercial areas that were designated in 2006, there was a need to reconsider whether those have to be relegated to commercial or whether they could benefit from having mixed use in the future as well. So that's why the actual mixed use district has expanded, and it's fallen under a more specific definition of the Sumter Road mixed use district. And you can see that even down at Bemis and Sumter Road, those are identified as anchor lots in the new mixed use district. The area at Sumter Road and Bemis Road has expanded in mixed use. And I should point to my actual page here, but this area has expanded, but it would be considered to be likely just one development site that's connected to the existing sanitary that's there. There's no desire from the public input we got to expand the sanitary or to have intense development grow along Sumter Road. Everything in between from that intersection to this one is still designated as rural residential future land use, with the caveat that what you see there is a hatched line. What that hatched line is the area that we've identified for recommended design standards for residential development, so that it's not just a matter of people taking those agriculturally zoned lots and splitting them up into 1 acre parcels along Sumter Road, or even as cul-de-sacs with 1 acre lots, but more thoughtfully designing them so that they have restricted entries and kind of a pattern along the roadside, and maybe developed as cluster developments with kind of a grid pattern, or as open space preservation developments. So the hatch line just really means, hey, take a look at the plan, look at the recommendations for some of the recommended development patterns in this area. And those are actually linked back to some of the zoning language that we put in the zoning ordinance amendment for the Sumter Road Overlay District. And then we do remove the commercial from this entire stretch, but that doesn't mean we remove commercial land uses per se. It just means that commercial is one of several land uses that could go in the mixed-use district, but we don't relegate any property to making it having to be commercial in the future. There's a big number 2 on the existing as well that I feel is necessary to point out. And this is interesting. There was a specific recommendation in the 2006 Southside Master Plan that called for the area behind Butts and Lumber, which is an occupied parcel, that if that parcel and the parcel to the south of it, which is vacant, ever got owned by the same landowner, that they could then be eligible for rezoning to commercial. We have left that out of this plan effort. It just does not seem like it's appropriate, or it was not something that anybody was really pushing for, including the owner of that adjacent commercial parcel. So we've taken that out. So the footnote's in there just because that's in the old map, but it's not part of this plan. One other change I will note, and I'm sorry to drag this on, but right here at the corner of Bemis and Sumter Road, there's one landowner that owns 3 different parcels at that intersection on the northwest corner. He has actually expressed interest in kind of down zoning or down designating that one of the parcels. So where you see there was commercial around the corner on a big 6-acre L-shaped parcel previously, the landowner himself actually requested that we consider taking that back to a rural residential future land use designation, which would allow him to rezone to a residential zoning district. So that's one of the other changes.
Director Power, if this was to be recommended to the Township Board, could you walk us through what some of the next steps would be for adoption of this and when this would go theoretically into effect?
Yep. If it's recommended to the Township Board at the first available meeting, the Township Board will be given an update on the overall plan, and then they could pass a resolution adopting the plan right away. I think there's just one meeting for that. So that would just the plan would then take effect, and then from that moment on, it should be a guideline for any future zoning decisions in that area.
Okay, thank you so much. Do any of the commissioners have questions this evening on this agenda item? No? Do you have any questions, Ms. Krishnan? Do we have any public comment this evening or any questions from the audience on this agenda item? Director Power, I hate to do this and bring you all the way back over to your computer again, but I have a feeling I know the answer, but do we have anybody on Zoom or any questions from the public?
Was your guess no?
My guess was no. All right, since we do not have any questions from the public and no more comments from the commission, are we ready to take action on this agenda item?
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, I do have another question. Director Power, you included in the packet tonight an example text of a resolution of adoption for the Planning Commission to, well, resolve to adopt. If we were to want to move forward with this agenda item, would we need to reference this resolution of adoption? And if so, does it need to be read into the record or no?
Please do. Please just refer to the resolution of adoption, and that's all you would have to say with this, as we've done for past master plans.
Right. Any other questions, Commissioner Jar? Or
Not on item 1, no, sir.
all right, any other board members wish to speak on this item? All right, are we ready to take action?
Mr. Chair, it's kind of a strange motion. I don't usually get to do these resolutions of adoption. So Director Power, if I leave anything important out, please feel free to amend my motion or make a suggestion. I move that the Planning Commission declares to adopt the 2022 Van Buren Charter Township Sumter Road Corridor Plan with the resolution text presented by staff this evening. Will that be sufficient?
Yes.
I'll support.
We have a motion by Commissioner Jar, support by Commissioner Cullen. Do we have any comments or discussion regarding the motion? All right, if there's no discussion, can we have a roll call, please?
Sherry Budd,
Yes.
Brian Cullen,
Yes.
Jeff Jar,
Yes.
Brian Kelly.
And the motion's approved, and you're passing this on to the Township Board for recommendation of adoption of the corridor plan. Thank you so much, Director Power.
Thank you.
All right, item number 2 on the agenda, it's the Sumter Road Corridor zoning text amendment. Brings it back to you again, Director Power.
Thank you. And thank you, Planning Commission, for all the work that went into this as well. As we mentioned in the last item, the Sumter Road Corridor zoning ordinance amendments were the outcome of the plan effort that was guided by the fact that we really need an implementing tool to make these things come to life and make sure that the development actually does get built responsibly, and that there is some uniformity to this district architecturally and with landscaping and with certain development forms. So, and in a way that doesn't act the same way as some other similar mixed-use zoning districts, because this was identified as a very unique rural district with a lot of different potential for land use that you don't often see in a mixed-use zoning district. So it was an interesting exercise, but we ended up with something that was very specific and detailed that I think responds well to the Sumter Road corridor. So the first thing I'll go over quickly, because we have gone over the whole thing previously, is that based on the designation of all these areas that are outlined in that dark blue in the Sumter Road Corridor Plan as being Sumter Road mixed use, we then wanted to make a Sumter Road mixed use zoning district that could be applied upon rezoning requests. And the district is a new form-based set of regulations that incorporate building type standards that are similar to the precedent illustrations that were provided in the plan. And they contain a regulating plan that assigns lot types based on those in the plan as well. There's a table of permitted uses that applies to everything in this district, which are uses by right and by special land use that get sorted and assigned based on the area within the district that is identified. And that's based on the lot types specifically in the district that are in what's called a regulating plan. There will be a mix of residential, office, commercial, and light production or manufacturing uses. And the Sumter Road Mixed Use District also includes setback regulations, regulations on the alignment and spacing of buildings, in a manner similar in format to the existing mixed-use zoning district that's in the township zoning ordinance. Again, the areas in blue on this screen, or turquoise, whatever you want to call that, are sorted into what's called a regulating plan based on what type of lot falls within that district. And here are a series of illustrations from the planning consultant that demonstrate the 4 identified lot types. Looking at the top left here, that would be an anchor lot, what you might see at the corner of Bemis and Sumter Road in this example. Here at the top right, you have a frontage lot that's called the deep frontage lot that has kind of different layers of potential development based on the long depth of the lot, and those are typical of the lots on the west side of Sumter Road. The shallow frontage lot, and this is probably one of the more intense examples of a shallow frontage lot, but this is kind of a revisioning of the Bell Point Shopping Center, and what could happen if those buildings were brought up to the front. And that's kind of those again, shallow frontage lots mean that there's not much depth to them, and they're meant to be highly visual and have some more of those maybe commercial and office components to them. And then the rear lots are those that are to the west of Sumter Road behind the frontage lots, or that may be given access in the future but don't currently have access. So there are different development options for when they do get access. The other item in this set of zoning ordinance amendments was the creation of a Sumter Road Overlay District. And just like with the Belleville Road Overlay District, this is an area where certain design standards will apply when new development comes in. They're kind of toned down in comparison with a really formal downtown district, but there's still a lot of landscaping recommendations, lighting recommendations, things about the character of the buildings that need to be applied. And then in the areas where you see residential development, there are requirements on spacing of driveways and roadways, and the pattern that has to develop to accommodate the desired residential form. So again, and I mentioned this during the public hearing, but this ended up culminating in edits to a pretty significant swath of the zoning ordinance to cover some new definitions, some new permitted uses, and really just bringing permitted uses into a new district and identifying in our table where those can apply within the district. Changes to the schedule of regulations and changes to allow that Sumter Road Overlay District to take shape. After our last meeting, I do want to bring up that there were some edits that were still kind of in red line at the last meeting, and I'll just, again, verify what those changes were that we most recently discussed. One was regarding the greenbelt requirements, to clarify under the permitted uses table that we're talking about linking the commercial uses in the Sumter Road Mixed Use District to the greenbelt standards that would be typical for commercial, the industrial uses subject to the greenbelt standards typical for industrial, just so providing some clarifying language on that. We changed a trigger that places limits on commercial, office, and industrial development from being based on a setback to an existing dwelling to being based on a setback to a residential zoning district. So that was an important distinction that we had good discussion about at the last meeting, and that will provide some limits and safeguards, especially on those kind of tight commercial lots adjacent to commercial or office lots adjacent to housing or residential zoning. We clarified some terms and timelines for hearing appeals on the building type determination, and there's actually kind of a lengthy description of how we'd go about handling those appeals, because we want to be able to hear those requests, but not in an overly cumbersome way where they're kind of stopping development in its tracks. So what we ended up saying is that building types can be are the discretion of the planning director, and then prior to an approval of a site plan, there needs to be a determination on the building type that's the consensus with the planning commission, but also there's an option for the neighbors and the people across the street to appeal that determination, as well as the applicant. We made some clarifying edits in the Sumter Road Overlay District as well, and removed the 50% minimum glass requirement from section 6.409 C3C, because some of these building types, especially in the rural area, don't really lend themselves to the kind of glass facade that you'd see in a downtown district. And then just fixing a typo on Belleville Road, changing that to Sumter Road. So those edits have been brought into the newest version of the zoning ordinance amendments, and that's where we leave this today. The version that's let's see if I'm missing. There's one other thing I'll go back and mention. When we talked about the limits on commercial, office, and industrial adjacent to residential, I did add that that condition to banks with drive-throughs in the rear as well. So those are also subject to limits, because you don't want to be in a home site 100 feet from a bank with a drive-through right behind you in this district. So that was something else we added. And I think that covers all of the changes since our last meeting, or that were in progress at our last meeting. So that's the more refined version of the ordinance. And that is all I had on this topic. I would invite you to discuss the zoning ordinance amendments. Let me know if you see anything else, or if you'd like to recommend this also for adoption, in which case it's just a simple motion with a recommendation to the board.
Right.
And they'll have 2 readings.
All right, thank you so much, Director Power. Do you have any questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner Jar.
The text changes to section 3, 121H with the planning director's interpretation. I know that in the last meeting, we were having a discussion about how we could include the neighbors across the street. I want you to know I've read that text and it was very good. I don't know who the wordsmith was, but it's very good work. Thank you. Was it Dan? Okay, Dan, Director Power, that was excellent work. I'm very happy with how that turned out.
The best form of flattery. So I used some of the language from another section of the zoning ordinance that our friends in our planning consultant world wrote, but thank you.
Excellent, but I thought that deserved a comment. Other than that, I have really nothing other to say, other than I do wish Commissioners Barr and Atchison were here because of their role in assisting with this process. I'm sure they would be pleased with this progress too. Thank you.
They were very involved. Yep.
I think the Planning Commission has worked really hard on this ordinance amendment. It's not something that was designed overnight or just put together. Both the Sumter Road Corridor Plan and the draft text amendment with the overlay, every aspect, literally the form-based code has been applied to individual properties and the impacts have been anticipated. What can it do? What can we do to address that? So I think overall, this is one of the best written ordinances we have come up with in recent times. So hopefully it will protect the character of the area as is desirable for all the people who have lived there for a long time, while at the same time also helping to fix the properties that are really not lending themselves to being part of that corridor.
Through the chair, question for Director Power. Do we have a list of people that are waiting for us to approve this so they can start development along Sumter Road?
Another good question. There is a project that, there are some buildings in need of redevelopment. If you drive down that corridor, it's obvious. And there's one project that has been kind of in limbo with the former drive-through, or the former burger restaurant. And there's some ideas that have been kind of brought up in a conceptual level and some preliminary plans provided. This would allow that to hit the ground running if they wanted to start to apply to get that going, which would be, at least getting that building taken care of would be very helpful, I think. And then there is one building that was built as a dwelling that became a commercial use that was also stuck in, I'll use the term limbo again, because they were unable to kind of market it for residential when they converted it to the zoning that it lies in, which is the C zoning. So this would enable that to go back to a residential use if desired. So there are a couple of things that I know are very pressing, and then other things that I think could be opened up over the next few years.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I do want to make one minor comment. And this appears in the ordinance, but I realize that the phrasing in my bullets that I just had on the screen is a little off. With respect to the limits on commercial, office, and industrial adjacent to residential zoning, those are limits on the building and not limits necessarily on the site. I just want to make that clear. If you build a building within those setbacks from the property line, that's when those limits apply. So just to clarify that.
Great. Thank you so much, Director Power. Any other comments from commissioners? No? Director Power, I have one question. I also am very impressed with the wording on H as well, but I do have one minor concern with it, and I mentioned it previously. I am not a fan of the word appeal getting used in anything coming from anything that you've reviewed since it's coming up to the Planning Commission, and it kind of starts ringing of an issue that may pop up for the zoning board as opposed to us. So is there a way we can modify that word to something more to the effect of maybe reviewed by the planning commission or interpreted or something a little less
Yeah,
along those lines?
thank you, Mr.
I
Chair.
just don't, when you start using the word appeal, it makes it seem like it's more of a as of right and I get to do this kind of step up to the next level.
Right.
Where if we're just trying to have somebody's, yeah, I think it says appealed, and then it runs through about 4 or 5 of them where it will go appealed by the applicant to consider at a regular meeting. If such appeal is not requested, the other, and then it starts more shifting it towards restrictions, notification restrictions, and everything else. And from what I'm gathering from our conversations on it, it should be more towards a review and an interpretation on the decision, not a, formal appeal process.
That's right. You have brought that up, and thank you for catching that. And we could discuss now, but would modification be something that the planning commission would prefer, or we want to just go with, and maybe Vidya has some suggestions, but
We could phrase it as an aggrieved party, or whatever the term that is used is, can request an interpretation or clarification by the planning commission, because that's technically what they're doing, right? I mean,
Correct.
if they're not sure of what your interpretation is, the planning commission will provide that clarity. It's a good point, because appeal is technically within the purview of the zoning board of appeals. We don't want to confuse or make the waters murky, because they are the ones who listen to interpretation challenges. So we can say, ask for clarification from the planning commission.
And I just, if we watch the wording from aggrieved party or anything else and try to keep it, just if you'd like additional interpretation, you could, something to that effect. Then it makes it more so of, hey, we're not telling you that you absolutely have to do this. It's now an option you have if you'd like further interpretation.
very good.
We can write an applicant seeking additional clarification can ask the planning commission to provide such clarification on the requested architectural.
Yes, we'll make some
We'll take out
edits.
the legal terminology from that.
And that's really, pardon me, that is really the concern, is that appeal is a loaded word and has to do with taking a challenge up to the zoning board specifically of appeals. And we want to make sure that we don't complicate our ordinance
Understood.
or overload the word. And you're right, I do remember in the last meeting you bringing that up.
It's that problem when you get pesky attorneys involved. When they see that word on there.
Pesky or not, sir.
You wouldn't know about that, would you, Jeff?
Don't know anything about it. So, all right, thank you, Director Bauer. That was my only comment. The language looks really good. The committee, everybody has put in such hard work on this, and it's come together quite nice. So, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
If we were to change that word appeal to, what did we say, interpretation, would that amount to a non-substantive change or a minor revision?
Yes, yes. You could still make the motion to send it on to the Township Board of Trustees, subject to that correction being made before the draft goes to the board. And Director Power can provide you with an updated copy at your next meeting to show that it was done.
Excellent. All right, thank you. Do you have any other comments or questions? All right, seeing as we have done, are we ready to take action on the agenda item?
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Jar.
I move that the Planning Commission declares to adopt the 2022 Van Buren Charter Township Sumter Road Corridor zoning text amendments using the resolution text presented by staff this evening with the notation that the word appeal shall be replaced in section 3.121H. And that's my motion.
I'll support.
All right, we have a motion by Commissioner Jar, support by Commissioner Cullen. Do we have any comments or discussion regarding this item or this motion that is presented before us? No comments or discussion? Can I have a roll call, please?
Sherry Budd? Yes. Brian Cullen?
Yes.
Jeff Jar? Yes. Brian Kelly?
Yes, and the motion passes, and it is now going to be recommended to the Township Board for consideration to adopt the text amendment. Director Power, as a practical matter, I know was discussed about providing us a copy of that wording. At least for myself, I don't need the whole draft, just that paragraph would be sufficient. So, thank you. Great, we are on to the amended agenda item number 3. Since the original one was removed from the agenda this evening, that brings us to the zoning ordinance discussion regarding side entry garage and building separation requirements for residential developments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A few introductory comments on this, and then I would like to defer to our planning consultant. But with our planning consultant in the room tonight as well, it's good to go back to the basics of our master plan. I want to just point out that in the 2020 Van Buren Township Master Plan, we identified a series of goals and objectives. There's a whole set of goals and objectives that related to a residential goal, which is to provide an adequate supply of housing that meets the needs of new and existing township residents, is responsive to changing generational preferences, allows residents to age in place, adds value to the community, and achieves a high standard of excellence in aesthetics and design. And when you get into the objectives, which are more specific than the goals, we talk about maintaining and improving existing neighborhoods and developments by observing where reinvestments should occur on a continuing basis, being apprised of current programs and techniques to quickly identify, to achieve identified investments, and then encouraging the development of new housing in what's called missing middle formats and or layouts that are currently absent or in short supply, and by creating zoning districts and design standards as necessary in the appropriate areas of the township. So I'd say that all as a backdrop that we have had trends that kind of bring some of those objectives to light in recent years. We see an increased interest in development of smaller lot, higher density, single-family residential detached housing, increased housing prices, which of course is it's subject to change. But these trends aren't unique to the township. We also have a trend that may be a little bit more unique to us than other townships that are growing. We have a high number of residential site condominiums and subdivisions that were started 20 or 30 years ago that are maturing and have a certain level of smaller lots built into them with mixed in with larger lots. I say this all to bring to light that we want to position the township in a way that enables robust housing in a more attainable lot or housing choice for new residents and existing residents. And in doing so, we wanted to take another look at some of the standards we have on the books, which were written for very good intention to ensure that there's a high quality of high quality of residential architectural character in the township. Specifically, the requirement that we have a high number of our garages be facing sideways so that you don't have, especially the situation where you have the garages out in front of the buildings and kind of pose a visual imposition on people walking through a neighborhood. And we also have some pretty robust standards for the separation of residential buildings in our residential developments. There's a requirement in the current zoning ordinance for a 20-foot minimum separation between residential buildings. So I'm saying that because those features tend to also invoke larger lot sizes and potentially more costly housing choices. And we wonder if there's ways that other communities in the township can look at meeting the same ends to the goals that we have in our master plan without requiring such a stringent standard specifically for the side entry garages and the separation between residential buildings. So we wanted to take a look at that and just start a conversation. We do have some developments that are that have successfully built out with the 30% side entry garage standard in place. But when you look at future trends, smaller lot sizes, you look at 50 or 60-foot lots and making a more expansive option for affordable and attainable housing, then you might run into some issues with that high of a threshold for side entry garages. So I asked our planning consultant to do some research and see what we could find out about whether there are other standards out there for side entry garages or for architectural or landscaping standards that may meet some of the same goals as side entry garages. So we wanted to start this conversation, and it may end up with us saying we don't want to change anything. It may end up with us saying that we're open to other options. So I guess I wanted to kind of leave it there. I do have some visual aids that I put together, but I think videos are better. So you have a handout tonight that has some different architectural styles of garages and housing units. And we'll go to my slides if we need to, but I think I'll leave it at video's discussion from here. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Power. One of the key buzzwords that every Planning Commission member must have heard over the past few years is affordable housing. Over the years, the term affordable has been replaced by the term attainable. They're completely different. Affordable is market-driven. You cannot force somebody to sell a house for $200,000 when the cost of the materials is $180,000. So the developer prices the cost of the house based upon the cost of the materials and the cost of land. So there used to be a benchmark that was, this range was considered as affordable. That range is no longer a true reflection of housing. Instead, the term has now evolved into something called attainable housing. Depending upon what your income level is, a certain type of housing or a certain cost of a single-family home is affordable to you. After all, that's the ultimate American dream, right? I mean, we all would like to own a home of our own. So doing research, the Van Buren Township zoning ordinance had a PUD ordinance, planned unit development, which basically had a residential component and a commercial component. We did some PUDs, which were not very successful. So when the last go-round of the ordinance happened well over a decade ago, at least 12 years plus, it was changed to PRD, planned residential development. We took the commercial component out, and we just said we are going to have different types of residential uses in it. It'll have multiple family, townhouses, single family detached, different types. Since we adopted the ordinance, we have not really had any new projects come by in the last decade. We do have some of our single family condominium, site condominium subdivisions that were never finished. You're all aware of it, Cobblestone Creek, Cobblestone Ridge, Walden Woods. We have several. With the market being what it is, we are finally having interest in having those projects finished, which is a good thing because when the infrastructure is laid out and the home lots are laid out and they are not built upon, it affects the values of the homes that have already been built because you're seeing vacant lots where it's obvious homes should have been there. We do have some interest from developers coming in wanting to finish up these projects and put new homes in, but the problem is our PRD ordinance that was originally written and the agreements that are tied to each one of these developments clearly says that a minimum 30% of all lots shall be side entry garages. And the reason that standard was adopted all those years ago was very valid. We at the township wanted to upgrade the quality of our housing stock. We didn't just want developers to come in here and throw together just basic cookie cutter houses and say, you know what, we built houses and that's it. So the township adopted standards which required minimum amount of brick or stone, window openings, architectural details, and we definitely got an upgraded quality of homes. Problem is now we have some of these lots that are left over that are too small. The developer has already built those front entry garages on the other things, and now we have these lots left that are 50 to 55 feet wide or 60 feet wide. There is no way you're going to be able to fit a side entry garage. The logistics of getting a driveway and turning around do not work. The one solution might be to put the garage all the way in the back of the house, but that means there are unintended consequences to every action. You end up having that much longer a driveway going all the way back, so you essentially lose out on all the landscape space, and you end up creating way more impervious surface. This I know through practical experience in one of my clients where we adopted an ordinance. We said, no front entry, put the garages back, and we just got seas of concrete everywhere because people are like, okay, go all the way back. We are going to pave it all the way back, so there is no side yard, nothing. So we don't want to have an ordinance requirement that forces a design that will end up sacrificing another vital component of site design itself. Our ordinance seemed to be one of the only ones that had an absolute minimum 30% side entry. Side entry garages are good, but side entry garages are also very expensive to build. They also require much bigger lot size. Typical side entry garage lot width is about 70 feet, we would say, Dan?
At least,
You
yeah.
need 70 feet in order to be able to make the turn movements for cars to get into the garage. And the whole reason why side entry garages became popular all those years ago was to create neighborhoods. You wanted to visit a house with a garage attached to it, not a garage with a house attached to it. What happened with all these front entry garages is the first thing you see from the street is garage, 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 and the door is tucked somewhere in the back. That does not create for neighborhoods because people park their car, get in through the inside door, and you never have to see your neighbor again. And that's not what we wanted. We wanted the door to be primary and welcoming, which is why we said, you know what, you're not putting your garage door facing the front. At least 30% should be to the side. That is not a design style that is working in the current circumstances of the projects that we have left and the new projects that we hope we can get in our areas that are zoned single-family residential. So Director Power asked me to look at other communities. What do other communities do? How do they address the situation? So I looked at Lyon Township, City of Novi, Ypsilanti. I also took a look at Plymouth Township, Canton, Pittsfield. I literally, except for Ypsilanti, I did not find any township or municipality that mandates a minimum percentage of side entry garages. In Ypsilanti Township, it's not just, it can be side entry or recessed garage, which means you can still have a front entry garage, but the garage should be placed to the back. So that brought me to researching architectural drawings. Can front entry garage properties look attractive? Dan, is it possible to put it on the screen so it can be seen on the big screen? So this front entry garage samples that we have here is not the front entry garage of yesteryears where we used to just have like a big flat garage door and just a front door and just, thrown together. These are architecturally detailed homes that have the garage pushed back, or even if it's front entry, the garage is an architectural feature of the house itself. In addition to that, a developer who is trying to put in front entry garages is probably going to get a few more lots to make up the money than side entry, because instead of 70-foot lots, you can have 50 to 55-foot lots. The compromise here is the quality of architecture that they're going to put on these homes is going to be a lot higher. Our ordinance currently requires on the side elevations brick at least till 50%, up till the first floor level, and on the front facade, we require 50 to 75% brick or something. So one of the considerations we thought, which is not an unreasonable thing, would be to say if front entry garages were to be permitted, the garages have to be an architectural feature of the house. If you go to a couple of the next elevations, Dan, which shows even if you're putting in, it's no longer the garage door that is just 4 horizontal metal panels, which probably is the cheapest one that you can get. But the garage door itself is designed more as a feature or a front door. If you go to the next set of elevations, the doors are designed like, this is a typical example of a recessed garage door. If you look at the first and the second image, the front door of the house is there and the garage is pushed back. It's still a front entry garage, but the garage is not the first thing that you will see when you approach the house. And this can be accommodated on a 50, 55-foot lot. This is a sample only for recessed garage. I would not advocate full siding front facades. I think if I think we have come a long way in trying to get higher quality materials on our facades. I wouldn't want to go back to say you can just put vinyl siding on the whole house. This is merely a representation for how the garages can be front-facing, placed towards the back, and not the most prominent feature of the house. So this is purely for discussion at this point of time. I know it's something to digest. This is an ordinance that's been on our books for such a long time, and a 30% is absolute. In some other communities, in literally almost all the other communities that I looked at, they like side entry garages, but there is not a minimum designated. And if you're going to design a subdivision, you have to show at the onset itself which are the respective lots that are going to be side entry. You cannot say, okay, 30%, and we leave it up to you to decide which those 30% are going to be. Those municipalities say, okay, if you're going to show us side entry, even if it's only 4 side entry, when you lay out the site condo, you need to show us which are those 4 side entry garages going to be. So that was one of the things that we would like the Planning Commission to consider. Maybe it is something you don't want to consider and you say, nope, 30% or nothing. In some cases, the Planning Commission, in some municipalities, the Planning Commission does have the flexibility if a developer proposes much higher quality of architecture. For instance, the entire front facade is going to be masonry, brick or stone. You add architecturally detailed pillars, like the first example over here where you have like brick base. These homes are like what you would find adjacent to downtown Plymouth. When you go down the side streets, you see these beautiful, where they have wraparound porches. Some of this architecture can be pleasing. So if that is something the Planning Commission would like to consider, that is one issue in front of you. The second issue is building separation. When you have 50 to 55-foot lots, having a 20-foot separation between buildings will make the homes narrow shotgun houses. So 50-foot lot, 10 foot off on one side, 10 foot off on other side. You have a 30-foot wide house. 30-foot wide house cannot fit in a front entry 2-car garage. It becomes a 1-car garage because minimum width for a 2-car garage width has to be at least 22 feet in new construction. 22 feet, that leaves you 8 feet for a front door, which once again makes the garage the most prominent feature. So the two are tied. If we are looking at the garage, we are looking at building separation. Once again, when we looked at most of the municipalities, the separation distances vary anywhere from 10 to 40 feet between buildings, depending upon which zoning district it is in. If it is a larger acre lots, the separation between buildings is up to 40 feet, but on smaller lots, it's as less as 10 feet. In Plymouth Township, the building separation requirement, irrespective of which zoning district it is 10 feet. But they faced a challenge over there because they didn't anticipate what the engineering and drainage consequences would be. So they have faced a little bit. Since McKenna does the planning for Plymouth also, I had an opportunity to speak to the planner and say, what are the unintended consequences of reducing building separation distances? She said the one challenge that we are facing is drainage issues between properties. If you reduce it to 10 feet, that is essentially 5 feet on each property side. So you have got to put in additional requirements for drainage between properties, either mandate French drains. There are ways to solve the drainage problems, but I think that should be tied into the ordinance, not merely tell a homeowner, you just need 10-foot separation, and one person builds and says, I built first, so I don't have to do anything. I'm going to drain onto the next property, and the next person comes, makes their grade slightly higher than the first neighbor, and now we have a problem because the water is going back and forth. So if we were to reduce the building separation distance, we would also have to consider other engineering considerations in order to make sure that we are not creating a problem. Once again, our ordinance currently says 20 feet. 20 feet separation is not feasible on 50-foot wide lots and good architecture. So it is something to be considered. One of the subdivisions which we have a lot of these narrow lots left in is Townsend Park, formerly Victoria Park Estates. They are finishing up, but that property is unusual in that it's got a consent judgment on it, which was, then I don't know which year was the consent judgment, a long time ago?
It was around 2010 when that was
10
done, yeah.
or before, so it's like over 12 years ago. So there is some legal agreements and any modifications on their lot and their side entry garages is something that is negotiated between the developer and the township board. It's not something the planning commission would consider, and it's not a text amendment because there's already a judgment on it. Any changes to the judgment is negotiated between the two parties. But we are looking at it from the standpoint of the other subdivisions that have properties that are left to be finished up, where we can get good quality residential development, but we are in a catch-22 situation now. 30% mandated side entry garages will result in much fewer lots, and much fewer lots on a site condominium would result in cost of construction being much, much higher, which means the homes are no longer affordable or attainable. So it's a it's an unusual situation to be in. We want homes built, but we want top quality. So the compromise we thought that would be reasonable is allow them on smaller lots, but up the architectural requirement on the buildings. You cannot just have ordinary, if you're going to build front entry garages, the garage doors have to be an architectural door. The materials on the front facade have to be 75 to 100% brick or stone. So this is something for the Planning Commission to think over. I know this is sudden, and we haven't really discussed residential district standards or changing them in a long time. We have always dealt with commercial or industrial district regulations. So if you would like to review this and let Dan and me know what your concerns are, if there is any aspect of this that you would like to consider, we can bring back some samples before you sample ordinances. Or if you think this is a bad idea and we are going to stick to 30% or nothing, that's fine too.
Thank you so much. Questions, comments from any of the commissioners?
I have a couple through the chair. Concerning the 55, is that where our lots, the existing lots that we're trying to allow the developers to go, are they sitting at 50 feet for the most part?
Go ahead, Dan.
There's one project for sure where this is an issue in Townsend Park, and that is going to be kind of unique because, as Lydia said, that relates to a consent judgment for for how that gets developed. It all has to run back through the consent judgment. But we have another potential project at a conceptual level that takes an area that was zoned for or planned for through a PUD apartments, and they want to bring in lots as small as 50 feet wide and throughout the project. And on the one hand, it's less intensive than an apartment plan.
Yep.
On the other hand, 50 feet lots with side entry garages is where we run into some pretty significant restrictions.
Yeah.
Well, a concern that I have on that, first of all, these existing ones, can they bring that PRD back to us to consider the changes to that for those specific lots?
Most of them, yes, but the one with the consent judgment, no.
I understand that aspect. The other thing that I have is that most homes today, people have at least 2 cars. You have a 2-car garage. That's 22 to 24 feet at least in width. You take that away from 50 feet, that only leaves you 36 feet. 5 feet of offset, now you got 26 feet. That garage, front of the garage, even with architectural details, is still taking up 50% of the face of the property. So that's a concern I have, because the garage is still going to be a major feature when you're seeing that, even with architectural details. And would we be able to specify what those garage doors look like? Those are the types of things that I would be concerned with, because I've seen a lot of homes. My sister lives in Canton, and I've driven through, and that's the first thing you see in her yard is the garage that sits there. And I know when my dad was on the planning commission, the first thing that he argued about was what you see in these new developments is garage doors. Yeah. And he was very adamant about getting the side entrances. Now, I understand that in some aspects that we're confined on that, but in the new developments that are coming along, I understand these recessed garages look great. I mean, because now that brings the house to the front. And you start to see where, when you're looking at, regardless, if they're even with the front of the house, you're still blocking, and it still becomes a major feature of the home. So that would be my concern.
That's a very valid design point. And any consideration of an amendment, you can also say the garage shall not occupy more than 50% of any facade. Make a very valid point. I mean, if you take the distances off, we don't want to see that. So additional conditions can be a garage should not occupy more than 50% of the front of the facade and must be recessed.
Through the chair, that's the part, I think I like the recessed garage, so it's not the very first thing, and you're not got this big garage sticking out the front, it's still there. But, I mean, even if you put darker doors on it, if your house is gray, make it a darker gray door, put a little bit of design in the door so that it kind of stands out of the way rather than sticking out there with the big white doors, because usually you go by, you see, 10 feet.
Yes.
To get into the front.
Clients adopted an ordinance where they said if there is a front entry garage, the garage has to be set at least 4 feet back from the front face of the residential dwellings. It has to be minimum 4. You can make it even longer, so it'll still be front, but it'll be pushed back like this example over here, the second example over here where it is like, it's pushed back.
And even on those kind of lots, I could see that might mess with how much backyard they had, so I could live with that even coming up a little further as long as it doesn't come in front of that line on the front of the house, because those houses just look so much nicer. And even the one on the front, well, even the one with the white doors, it sits back enough that it's not offensive. So I think it's something that we could consider, but I think we need to make sure that they're making it look very presentable.
If I may? That question of form, that's a really good point about the overall proportion of width being taken up by the garage. And I know that in the report that Ms. Christen's made, just eyeballing it, none of those houses have a garage that's wider than 50%. Hey, these all look great. But I've certainly seen houses and lived near houses where the garage was 75% of the entire frontage. That doesn't look great.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I've also seen houses that are, since we're talking about smaller lots or larger developments, houses where they're a much taller house. They're taller than they are wide. They may have 1 or maybe 2 stories above a ground floor garage. And that might also be something that would be architecturally acceptable in some cases. So I'm not sure that it's as simple as simply an overall proportion of width must be less than 50%. There might be a width to height ratio like we have in some of our other design standards that we might want to consider. I'll also say that, I think 30% side garages, there was a time, there was a reason for that. At the time when, the standard of architecture was what it was, putting in that ordinance requirement was a good idea. It helped bring us a higher, a better look to the available housing in the township. But I think now some of the house architecture that's popular now, I'm not sure that it's appropriate for us to mandate that 30% requirement any longer. I certainly wouldn't want to discourage it. I think the mix looks good, and if there are lots that want to have a side garage, that would be just fine. Maybe we could, I know that in our design standards, there's a section that says, I want to say there are 5 different categories for determining if a building is substantively different from its peers in the same development. Maybe we could consider adding a 6th design element, separate call out for if you put in a side entry garage, this would, I think the text in it is that there are 5 points that make buildings substantively, I'm not using your word correctly, but that make a building different from the others, and you have to pick 3 of the 5, I think is what it says. Maybe we add a 6th and let them pick 3 of the 6, so that if we give the builder an incentive to still use side garage, but not a requirement, but an incentive, because we could be flexible in other areas.
We should still encourage side entry garages because there was a reason why we required it in the first place, and as a consequence, we got some really good-looking building architecture. We should still encourage it. I'm just reluctant about the 30% minimum requirement. I wish the ordinance did have some flexibility for the planning commission to, if a developer came before you and said, this is what I'm proposing, but I'm at 20% side entry rather than 30%, you can say, okay, based upon the architectural stuff, it is acceptable. But for some reason, the ordinance is written absolute. There is no deviation from it.
Written with an absolute, no variance. There, we can't do anything about it. The
Yeah.
rule is 30%.
Right,
in
and
a PUD.
typically-
It's strange because we have flexibility on setbacks, and I believe on building separation in a PUD.
Exactly.
So why we didn't have that flexibility, or why we weren't able to offer developers and homeowners that level of flexibility with regard to side entry garages, I'll just say that's lost to the annals of history. I don't know why we didn't do it at the time, but we have the opportunity to consider changing it now.
Right. And with regard to requiring more architecturally detailed garage doors, we can definitely add that in as a requirement in the ordinance itself. If you're going to concede and put in narrower lots, land is money, you're probably going to squeeze in for every 20 homes, one additional home. Putting in an architecturally pleasing garage door should not be the deal breaker. So I think we can add that in as a design requirement.
I like the idea of getting rid of the requirement, giving us some flexibility on the 30%. What I would be concerned with is us spending a whole lot of time to create changes in the ordinance to make these architectural requirements, to find out that nobody's really wanting to mess with them too much. So we spend a whole lot of time putting this together and then find out that somebody wants to do something else. What I was wondering if we can do with them is give more flexibility to the architect to present it. So like we were just discussing was the options of, hey, look, I don't like 30%, you don't need to do this, but check out this thing I'm going to build. And then allow it to be presented of, we're covering this, and then kind of give them some guide points like
We can do
Commissioner
that,
Jar was talking about was, hey, if you've got these things, this is what we're looking for. But if your architect has this design that stands out and is different, then here you go. So we can give them some guidance underneath like the additional points in the substantially different, but also not put it on the ordinance to tell them what they can build, because you may run into some architects that come out with some great designs for
So
like
would
this,
you-
like the setbacks, because we have the flexibility on all of those. So if we start narrowing them, start saying, hey, we want to see all these things, we may miss out on something.
So maybe in the section that says PUD modifications, it says modifications can be granted from setbacks, but it doesn't talk about side entry garages. Maybe we can say a modification can be granted from the side entry garage requirement upon a demonstration by the applicant of superior architecture, something. We can wordsmith that correctly so that it'll give you some flexibility, and you can provide these as samples to the architect. Maybe keep it simpler to start with and have these as design suggestions rather than hard guidelines.
And you might consider that 30% still being there, but it being in the form of, there should be 30% of either side entry garages or a
Recessed.
offered set of potential architectural embellishments to these buildings beyond the other ones in the zoning ordinance.
And I really like Commissioner Jar's suggestion of putting them in there, of saying, hey, here's some additions, so we're willing to be flexible, but this is our guide of what we're looking for when we're talking about keeping these things different. So give them that option, like you were suggesting, of you can do 30%, but here's some of the other offsets. And then allow houses with smaller lots, smaller adjustments to say, hey, we have a 22-foot garage, we want to narrow the side yard or do something else that'll give them a little bit more flexibility.
So the only reason I would suggest putting in a little bit more tighter language over there, just not flexibility, is planning consultants and planning commissions don't always remain the same. We don't want a situation years down the road where we go back to the old type of architecture which says, you know what, I have no problem with just a white garage door that is right there. I don't see what the problem is. I lived in a house like that, so it's not, I don't want to, I might not be around, and the board members might also change, but if the ordinance sets certain minimums, then we can be assured that even years down the road, the quality that will come through will still be good.
Styles change too, yeah.
I like the idea, set it so they get a set of guides, allow them to kind of present some
Sounds good.
changes, but put in,
Guide rails.
yep,
Guardrails.
yeah.
In the spirit of this discussion, as Vidya mentioned, setbacks and the layout of a building related to the garages, those two things are related. Commissioner Jar, you mentioned in one of your statements that in the PRD ordinance, there is flexibility for setbacks. That is true, but we have found recently there is a apparently hard line for the 20-foot separation between buildings for new developments. So that's just another thing I want to keep as active part of the conversation. Is that still something we're interested in, or are there engineering guidelines that we could provide for buildings that are closer together for drainage and things like
There's
that?
a terminology that we want to make sure we have correct. There's lot setback and there's building separation.
That's right.
And they're two different things. If you have a 10-foot separation between two lots, that means the buildings can be 10 feet apart. You measure wall to wall. I think we know from previous discussions, in fact, about our Sumter Road, that I'm not a fan of building offsets based on structures. If we have a lot line in a condominium project, then there's a setback from a lot line, and that's a different number than a building separation.
Right.
So whatever we're talking about, we want to make certain that we're getting that number correct, because they are not interchangeable beasts, right?
Yeah, which
There
was,
is a 20-foot building separation requirement. that
Minimum
there's no
separation,
flexibility
which
for.
implies a minimum lot line setback of 10 feet, right?
It would
imply
It would
it.
have to, yeah. And that's where I'd like to kind of open the conversation. Do we want to enable some
the
flexibility?
consequence of that also say developer A comes first and builds within 5 feet of the property line, and the hard line is 20-foot building setback, the person next to them is going to be punished with a 15-foot setback because he came first.
Well, and
Building
if
separation.
and if someone builds on the next lot over and puts it against the line, then the guy in the middle can't build. The property owner simply cannot build because he can't meet the
Yes,
separation.
we were
the
actually
setback
surprised
requirements.
when we looked at the ordinance. We said, okay, setback flexibility. And we said, yeah, building separation. And then Dan said, no, building separation is a separate clause that is absolute with no flexibility. So
Yes.
we're like, okay, so it's tied together. So we will bring that also.
Yes. Cool.
And Director Bauer, I think you were mentioning, did you mention something about engineering, or somebody mentioned engineering issues where drainage, things like that, you may want to?
When the setback from the property line, 5 foot is the minimum setback for any structures for single-family residential districts across all municipalities, because that is considered as the minimum safe distance for public safety in the event of a fire or something to be able to
For a
get through.
10-foot space for a fire truck to get through. right?
Correct. And for safety, for emergency personnel to get through. So we could probably, when we check the ordinance, we can probably also speak with the township engineer to see if, to prevent the creation of any drainage issues between the properties, if something can be put in there and then refer to the engineering guidelines. I don't want to put engineering requirements into a zoning ordinance because we are not engineers, so.
Yeah, and in fact, the Townsend Park, I hate to keep bringing up one project, but that's a really good example where there was, through the consent judgment, 10-foot, 5-foot separation from the side lot lines, and that enabled 10-foot building separation regardless of what's in the zoning ordinance. That's what ended up materializing through the consent judgment. So that's a really good visual example. You see the houses in the first phase of that project 10 feet apart, and to the extent they have swales and positive drainage to the front of the yard and the rear of the yard, it seems to work fine. I don't get drainage complaints over there, but it is something you have to be very careful about. And so we'll have to make sure our engineering standards are up to snuff with what could happen there if people don't grade those right.
I'm also concerned a little bit about this building separation being only 10 feet. Suppose somebody wants to do work in their backyard. If there's fences that are allowed, which now suddenly they can't get equipment back there if you have a gate of 4 feet sometimes. Suppose they want to put a pool in, a built-in pool, patio, a concrete patio. They're going to either possibly be on neighbor's property, damaging property, or having trouble getting the equipment back to where it needs to be.
Hmm.
I don't know if that's something we want to be aware of or not. You know, when you start to bring homes closer together, sometimes they say fences are better neighbors or create better neighbors. And there's maybe a reason for that, especially if they have to damage the neighbor's property in the process of getting done what they want done.
I'd also add that since we're talking about architecture and aesthetics, we can have a very beautiful building, two very beautiful buildings, but if they're crammed right up next to each other, neither one of them looks good.
You're right. I agree.
This is a discussion in which we're talking about architectural aesthetics and, layouts. I think it's a valid point to bring up.
So
And I
the-
know developers want to put as many things in as they can, so they want as narrow a lot as they possibly can have. But by the same token, I think personally, we have to consider what the future people buying the home, they may walk in and say, hey, this looks great, till they get to know their neighbor and find out, I'd like to have a little bit more space between us. You know, that comes at a later time. And is that something we need to be concerned with as a commission as we're approving these things for minimum lot size and minimum things of that nature?
That raises a good point, at least in terms of if there is an interest in closer together housing, then we need to be all the more careful about architectural requirements and access, to your point, if there's ways that a developer could propose a common access route along the back lot lines or alleys or different ways of getting to and from sites where you could still have tighter housing for whatever reason to make it more attainable and smaller lot sizes that are more marketable, just to be really careful about making sure there is still valid access to all those lots. So I guess that one other question for the Planning Commission, would you want to give staff direction to still keep the building separation alive in the zoning ordinance, or would you want us to focus more on the setbacks and strike that perhaps? That's one thing that I think we'll need to work through.
I'm certainly interested in the side garage issue and updating that. The setbacks, if we're talking about trying to reduce them, I'm not as excited about changes to building separation or setbacks. But if you want to bring some another proposal to us and say this is really what we think, I think we all value your opinions, and if you have an opinion on it that you have worked on and you want to present it to us again for feedback, I would be very interested in hearing about it.
Absolutely, because I mean, you are the ones that are dealing with people that are coming and wanting to develop.
We definitely will, along with the garage issue. If we can still hold to maintaining distance between structures from the property line in the interest of public safety and access also, we don't want to create issues of trespass later on. So we'll definitely look into it. So we do have your direction to look into this and bring something back before you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have one other question. With a lot of these, isn't it going to come up with some bylaws, things like that, a lot of these developments?
Yes.
Could we address the access points through a bylaw where it says, hey, look, these are your properties, but there's a common access where if you need to get in the backyard, I know, and then you can put in.
Typically, in site condominiums, they do have, if somebody is going to build something in their backyard, most site condominiums do not allow for fences. They simply do not, unless you have a swimming pool. Fences are not allowed, and they don't allow above-ground swimming pools either. It has to be in-ground with a fence around it. Also, their bylaws will have requirements where they will have, you have to obtain a construction easement from your neighbor if you have to, take a little backhoe thingy to dig up for your patio, and then you have to fix the common shared joint yard between the two. So that would be something also.
Question that I know that applies to site condominiums and PUDs. I know we haven't had a platted subdivision in a long time, but what you are proposing with the side entry garages and maybe even the building separation / setback, you're thinking that would apply to a platted subdivision as well, right?
I haven't reviewed a platted subdivision in 22 years.
Yeah, that doesn't mean it's not in the ordinance.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I used, in a city that I worked for previously, there were platted subdivisions still being built in 2019, but here, we don't seem to have them very commonly, so. But in the zoning ordinance they are lumped together, so it would presumably be for both applications, but that's where bylaws aren't as common, and you have to be more careful about a project, because they get designed pretty much comprehensively up front, and then the developer, then everybody's kind of on their own, so.
I think the platting process is so elaborate by the time it goes to the tentative preliminary plat, tentative plat, final preliminary plat, final plat. Developers just find site condominiums more easy to get through the approval process, which is why I think I've reviewed one.
It's not because of those side entry garages, right?
So I think we have some direction.
Yes.
Can't wait to see some updates, but I don't think it's a major pressing issue for anybody on the board, correct? So we'll just on free time and bring it back when it's ready.
All right.
We are up to amended item number 4 on the agenda, the gasoline filling and gasoline service station zoning ordinance text amendment.
I can go over it really fast, Director Power. if
Yes,
you would
please
like
do.
to.
I can have the handouts on the
Yes.
overhead as well if you need, so.
So we have been discussing this ordinance amendment for the past several months, and basically we are correcting a shortfall in our zoning ordinance where we allow gas stations as a principal permitted use in districts. Gas stations typically in most other municipalities, when we did our research, it's always placed as a special or a conditional land use because it does have impacts on safety, circulation, underground storage tanks, because once you put the tanks in, the property's use also gets limited. Upside down? So we looked at the ordinance, and the main change we made was changing gas stations to being special land use in the C1 general business, C2 extensive highway business district, and the freeway service district. We don't have too many parcels zoned freeway service district. And we also created a new section 5.144, which has standards for automobile or gasoline filling stations. We are lucky so far. We have managed to get the developments we have, which are pretty decently designed, considering we really have no standards in our ordinance for gas stations. But we want to make sure that we put this into the special land use category. Just to give you an example, technically, all of the B-Rod district, all the way up to Ecourts Road, we can put a gas station in by right. I don't think we need any more north of Tyler. I mean, we have that big speedway, we have the Meyer, I think we have enough. So when a use is a special land use, they have to demonstrate a need for that use in the community. So I think it's a good idea to put it as a special land use. So the only changes we have made is moved it from principal permitted to a special land use, and then we added specific design standards to make sure that the pumps, the canopy, everything is set reasonably from the property line. The only corrections to the draft that is before you tonight is under item 5. Dan, do you have the text up there? Under item 5, yes, Dan has added it in. I'd written it as ingress and egress drives. We're going to say two-way ingress and egress drives, just for clarification. And in subsection 6, which is driveway spacing on the next page, the spacing of the driveways has been updated for speed limit 30 onwards, 30, 35, 40, and 45. We have updated the spacing from 125 to 155, 185, 225, and 300. And the reason we updated these numbers is it would be consistent with section 9.106C of the zoning ordinance. We already have driveway spacing requirements elsewhere in the ordinance. We want to make sure we don't have two contradictory sections. So, other than that, this specific requirements ensures that we have adequate pedestrian circulation, vehicle circulation, signage, number of driveways, number of pumps, how they are placed. We did remove electric vehicle charging stations from this because Commissioner Cullen and Commissioner Jar had brought up very valid concerns. Somebody can just park right in front of the store and leave it there for 45 minutes, and now you're blocking everybody else from it. And we found a few sample ordinances for EV stations, and as the future seems to be moving more towards electric vehicles, we think there are going to be stations dedicated entirely only to electric vehicles. So I think it requires a little bit more thought put into it. And I went initially by the City of Grand Rapids ordinance where they just said EVs are exempt from zoning regulations. I don't think that's a good thing to do. So we will, we will set that aside for more study at a later date. Right now, there is no pressing requirement. We haven't been approached by anybody, but we will definitely look into that. When we have a little downtime, the Planning Commission can look at a few sample ordinances we provide. So this is before you tonight. You've discussed it a lot. If you don't have any questions or additional changes, it is up for recommendation, or is it for?
Yes, you can recommend to adopt it with those changes mentioned. We'll make sure that copy of the ordinance gets to the board with those minor changes.
Yes.
All right, thank you so much. Do you have any questions or comments from any of the commissioners? No? Do we have any,
Sorry, I was zooming.
oh, yeah. Do we have any questions or comments from anybody in the audience on this agenda item? Do we, somebody on Zoom? Nope. All right, so we have no public comment on this agenda item either. Are we ready to take action? I have a feeling I know who's making the motion.
Honor. Mr. Chair, I move to recommend to the Township Board that they adopt the text amendments to reclassify gasoline filling stations under the zoning ordinance as detailed in the McKenna letter dated May 24th, 2022, letter from staff dated July 8th, 2022, noting the corrections to item 5 regarding two-way ingress drive and item number 6, updated driveway spacing.
Support for the motion. Support. I have a motion by Commissioner Jar, support by Commissioner Cullen. Any comments or discussion regarding the agenda item? It's up for a motion. As we have none, roll call, please.
Sherry Budd? Yes. Brian Cullen?
Yes.
Jeff Jar? Yes. Brian Kelly?
Yes. And the motion to recommend a township board has been approved. All right, that brings us up to general discussion this evening. Before we get started, I'd like to kind of bring something up real quick. I believe I may have skipped over public comment on the zoning text amendment when we were talking about items, so I just want to put it out there if anybody in the audience or online has anything that they'd like to add into the zoning text portion of this, that we can get any public comment on that still.
Gas station ordinance or
No,
the
this was
Sumter
for-
Road corridor?
This was for the
zoning?
Sumter
Okay.
corridor, because we it kind of blended together between the first agenda item to the second agenda item, and then we carried in and went right into the motion, and I believe did not give an opportunity for anybody. So if anybody would like to speak regarding the text portion of it.
You did.
I did?
I think you did.
There was a public hearing, but there's an extra step in the new business discussion that we always try to encourage people to
Public comment.
take
Okay, second
take another
time.
chance to speak if they'd like to. So yeah, if any,
Yep,
Kinda
so
last call for comments on
just
that.
last call for comments on that item, even though we've kind of already yelled. All right, so, but, all right, anything else for general discussion this evening?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Commissioner Jar.
I do want to see some EV ordinance changes, but I do think that that's a great project for the winter months. When the construction's a little lower and we have fewer things on our agenda, I hope that, this year, end of this year, we can start looking at that. When we have less on the plate construction-wise.
Yeah, and if I could, I'll mention that there are standards in place for general accessory structures on commercial and industrial parcels that within a certain threshold, staff can review and approve those administratively. And structures like that, I would, if we're in a position where we're having somebody request an EV charging station, what I would do is look at if it's in a side or rear yard and it meets the other standards for accessory structures, we'll go with those standards, because that's a valid set of standards to use. But we'll want to look at ways to apply them more broadly and be more strategic about them. So we'll look at that in the winter. Sounds good.
We do have a pacing to our schedule throughout the year, so that's a good wintertime activity. That's all I have. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions for general discussion? No? All right, so I guess we are up to an adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting this evening?
Make a motion to adjourn.
I'll support.
Motion to adjourn by Commissioner Bud, support by Commissioner Cullen. All in favor, say aye.
I was
Aye.
laughing too hard.
Meeting's adjourned. You mean this?